The storm cellar door slammed open, and Nora Everly found herself staring down the barrel of a man's desperation. He stood in the doorway, snow whipping around his shoulders. One hand braced against the frame, and the other pressed to his ribs, where dark blood stained his shirt. His eyes locked on hers, gray and hard and calculating, and for 3 heartbeats neither of them moved. Then the wind howled, and he stumbled forward, and Nora made the choice that would ruin or save everything she had left. She caught his arm before he fell. He was heavy, all muscle and bone and winter cold. And when she guided him down the cellar steps, he moved like a man who knew exactly how much strength he had left and how to spend it. The door banged shut behind them, cutting off the worst of the wind. And in the sudden dim quiet, lit only by her single lantern, she could see him clearly. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, short beard crusted with ice, a face too controlled for the pain he had to be feeling. His coat hung open, and his shirt was torn where something, a knife or a nail or worse, had opened a gash along his ribs. He met her gaze, and his voice came out rough but steady. "I am not here to hurt you." Nora kept one hand on the shotgun she had propped against the potato bin. "Then why are you bleeding in my cellar?" He almost smiled. "Because the alternative was freezing in your yard." She should have turned him out. She should have fired a warning shot and sent him back into the storm and let the law or the weather settle his fate. But something in his eyes stopped her. Some flicker of exhausted honesty that looked too much like her own reflection. She had spent 2 years building a life in Blue Springs, 2 years writing careful columns for the town newspaper and keeping her head down and her past buried. She knew what it looked like when a person was one wrong choice away from losing everything. She set the lantern on the barrel and moved closer, keeping the shotgun within reach. "Sit." He lowered himself onto an overturned crate, his jaw tight. She pulled her shawl tighter and knelt beside him, lifting the torn edge of his shirt to see the wound. It was not as deep as she had feared, a long slice that had bled freely but missed anything vital. She fetched the clean rags she kept for emergencies and the bottle of whiskey her father had left behind when he died. The man watched her hands, not her face, as she poured whiskey over the wound. He hissed through his teeth, but did not pull away. "What is your name?" she said. He hesitated. Hollis Cutter. The name meant nothing to her. She pressed a folded rag against the gash, and he covered her hand with his, holding it in place while she tore strips of cloth for binding. His fingers were cold and rough and steady. She could feel the heat of him through the thin fabric, the life pulsing under damaged skin. "Why are you running?" she said. He met her eyes. "Because someone wants me to hang for something I did not do." Nora tied the bandage tight and sat back on her heels. "Are you guilty of something else?" He did not look away. "Probably." The honesty surprised her. Most men lied when they were cornered. She stood and wiped her hands on her apron, considering. The storm outside was still howling, the wind rattling the cellar door. No one would be moving tonight. Come morning, she could send him on his way or turn him in, depending on what she learned between now and dawn. "You can stay until the storm breaks," she said. "Then you leave, and we never speak of this." He nodded once. Agreed. She sat on the barrel and wrapped her arms around herself, watching him. The lantern light made his face all angles and shadows. He looked like a man who had made hard choices and lived with them, and she recognized that too. She had walked into Blue Springs 2 years ago with a stolen newspaper press and a story about inheriting it from a distant uncle. And she had built the Blue Springs Gazette on that lie. Every column she wrote, every truth she printed, sat on top of that one buried sin. She told herself it was different, because she was using the press for good, because the town needed a voice, and she was giving it to them. But late at night, when sleep would not come, she knew the difference between right and necessary was thinner than she wanted to believe. "What did they accuse you of?" she said. Hollis leaned his head back against the stone wall. "Stealing land documents from the county office. Documents that prove the railroad is trying to force a foreclosure on half the homesteads in the valley." Her stomach dropped. She knew about the foreclosure threats. She had been writing editorials about them for 3 months, trying to rally the town to fight back. The railroad wanted the land for a new route, and they were using every legal trick to take it. If someone had proof of fraud, it could stop the whole scheme. "Do you have the documents?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes." "Why did you steal them, instead of going through the law?" "Because the law in this county works for the railroad. I took the papers to stop innocent families from losing everything. But the sheriff found out, and now there is a warrant with my name on it." Nora studied his face. "If you are lying, I will know." "I am not lying." She believed him, which was either wisdom or foolishness. Time would tell which. She stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down a jar of preserves and a small loaf of bread. She set them on the barrel between them. "Eat. You look half-starved." He took the bread and broke it with careful hands. "Thank you." They ate in silence, the storm raging above them. Nora felt the weight of the choice she had just made, the risk she had taken on a stranger's word. If he was telling the truth, those documents could save the town. If he was lying, she had just sheltered a criminal and put her own neck in a noose beside his. "Where are the documents now?" she said. "Hidden." "Safe." "Where?" He met her gaze. "If I tell you that, you become as guilty as I am. I am already guilty of harboring you." He shook his head. "Sheltering someone during a storm is not a crime. Knowing where stolen property is hidden makes you an accessory. I will not put that on you." The logic was sound, but it frustrated her. She needed to see those papers, needed to know if they were real and worth the risk. But pushing him now would only make him close up tighter. She had learned patience in her 2 years of survival. She could wait. The storm battered the cellar door for another hour. They sat in the flickering lantern light, not speaking, each locked in their own calculations. Nora watched him from the corner of her eye. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe early 30s, with a kind of face that looked older because of what it had seen rather than how many years it carried. His hands were scarred and strong, the hands of a man who worked for his living. Freight foreman, she guessed. Someone who moved goods through dangerous country and knew how to handle trouble. Finally, the wind began to ease. The howling dropped to a steady moan, and the rattling of the doors softened. Hollis stood, moving carefully, testing his balance. Nora rose as well, picking up the shotgun. "You should rest," she said. "You lost blood. I have rested enough. I need to move before someone comes looking." She blocked his path to the door. "Where will you go?" He studied her face. "Why do you care?" "Because if those documents are real, I need them. I have been fighting the railroad in print for months, and it is not enough. The town needs proof, and you say you have it. So where will you go?" He hesitated. and she saw the moment he made his decision. There is an old lined shack on Lost Creek Ranch, north edge of the property. No one uses it this time of year. I can hole up there for a few days while I figure out my next move. Lost Creek Ranch. She knew it. The place had been in foreclosure limbo for a year. The owner dead, and the heir nowhere to be found. It was perfect, isolated, and forgotten. And it was close enough that she could reach him if she needed to. "I will bring you supplies tomorrow night," she said, "and I want to see those documents." He stared at her. "You do not have to do this." "Yes, I do. If you are telling the truth, this is the fight I have been waiting for. If you are lying, I need to know before you disappear and take the town's hope with you." He nodded slowly. "All right." Tomorrow night. She moved aside, and he climbed the steps, pushing the door open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean after the closeness of the cellar. He paused at the top, looking back at her. "Why are you helping me?" he said. She met his gaze. "Because I know what it is like to carry a secret that could destroy you. And because sometimes the only way to do the right thing is to break the rules first." He held her eyes for a moment longer, then stepped out into the night. The door swung shut, and Nora was alone with the dying lantern in her racing heart. She had just bet everything on a stranger's word and a desperate hope. She climbed the steps and barred the cellar door from the inside, then made her way back to her small house behind the newspaper office. Sleep would not come easy tonight. Morning broke cold and clear. Nora walked to the newspaper office, her boots crunching through new snow, and found half the town already awake and buzzing with news. Sheriff Calhoun was in the street with 2 deputies, showing a wanted poster to anyone who would look. Nora moved closer, keeping her face calm, and got close enough to see the sketch. It was rough, but recognizable. Hollis Cutter, wanted for theft of county property, armed and dangerous, reward for information leading to capture. Her stomach clenched, but she kept walking, nodding to neighbors, playing the part of the concerned citizen. Inside the office, she locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. The warrant was real. The danger was real. And she had just promised to meet him again tonight. She spent the day writing a column about the railroad's foreclosure tactics, carefully avoiding any mention of stolen documents or mysterious strangers. She interviewed 3 families facing eviction, took notes on the railroad's legal maneuvering, and built a case in print that was strong but not strong enough. Without proof of fraud, the railroad could hide behind procedure, and the law would let them. She needed those documents. She needed Hollis Cutter to be telling the truth. That evening, she packed a satchel with bread, dried meat, and a jar of stew. She added a clean shirt from her father's old trunk, hoping it would fit, and a small flask of whiskey for the wound. She waited until full dark, then slipped out the back door and headed north on foot. The night was bitter cold, but the sky was clear, stars scattered like ice chips across black velvet. She walked fast, her breath pluming white, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lost Creek Ranch appeared as a dark shape against darker hills. She found the lined shack by the thin thread of smoke rising from its chimney. She knocked once, soft, and the door opened immediately. Hollis stood in the doorway, his hand on his revolver, then stepped back to let her in. The shack was barely warmer than the outside. A small fire burned in a makeshift hearth, and a bedroll lay in the corner. Hollis had cleaned up, his hair damp and his shirt changed, the bandage visible beneath the open collar. He looked better than he had last night, but still worn, still wary. She set the satchel on the rickety table. "I brought food." He nodded. "Thank you." She met his gaze. "I saw the wanted poster. The whole town is looking for you." "I know. The sheriff thinks you are dangerous." "I am dangerous when I need to be." The honesty again, blunt and unshielded. She liked it more than she should. She sat on the one chair and waited. He crossed to the hearth and pulled a leather satchel from behind a loose stone. He opened it and drew out a stack of papers, yellowed and official, stamped with county seals. He handed them to her without a word. Nora read by firelight, her pulse quickening with every line. Forged signatures, falsified debts, backdated liens. It was all there, a trail of fraud that led straight to the railroad's land agent and the county clerk. If she could get these documents to an honest judge, the foreclosures would collapse. The families would keep their land. The railroad would lose. "Where did you get these?" she said. "The county clerk's private files. I worked freight for his office for 2 years. I knew where he kept the real records." "Why did you take the risk?" "Because my sister and her husband are on that foreclosure list. They have 3 children and a homestead they built with their own hands. I was not going to stand by and watch the railroad steal it." Nora looked up at him. "So you are not just a thief. You are a thief with a reason." He almost smiled. "Does that make it better or worse?" "I do not know yet." She set the papers on the table and stood. "If we take these to the circuit judge, he could issue an injunction, stop the foreclosures, start an investigation." Hollis shook his head. "The circuit judge will not be here for another month. And even if he were, the sheriff would arrest me the moment I set foot in town. These documents do not mean anything if I am in a cell or dead. Then we need another way." She paced the small space, thinking. "I have a press. I can print the truth. If the whole town knows what the railroad is doing, they can fight back together. Public pressure could force the judge to act sooner. And what happens to you when the railroad figures out where the information came from? I will deal with that when it comes." He caught her arm, stopping her. "You do not know what you are risking." She pulled free. "Yes, I do. I have been hiding and playing it safe for 2 years. I am tired of it. This is worth the risk." He studied her face, his gray eyes searching. "What are you hiding from?" She met his gaze. "That is my business." "Fair enough." The moment stretched, charged with something more than strategy. Nora felt the pull of him, the dangerous, steady heat of a man who saw too much and said too little. She stepped back, breaking the spell. "I will print the story tomorrow night," she said, "after the office closes. You stay here and keep out of sight. When the town sees the proof, the sheriff will have no choice but to investigate. And if the sheriff comes for you instead, then I will face it." She picked up the documents and tucked them into her satchel. "I am not backing down now." He walked her to the door. "Be careful." She nodded and stepped into the cold. She walked back to town with the documents pressed against her ribs under her coat, her mind already composing headlines. She would not print Hollis Cutter's name. She would not give the sheriff a reason to connect him to the story. But she would print every detail of the fraud, every forged signature, every stolen homestead. And she would dare the railroad to deny it. The next day she wrote like her life depended on it. She set the type by hand, her fingers black with ink, her back aching from bending over the press. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, printing page after page, until she had 500 copies of the special edition stacked and ready. The headline read, "Railroad Land Fraud Exposed. Evidence of Forgery and Theft." She had included transcriptions of the key documents, enough detail to be credible, but not enough to reveal her source. She was locking the office door when she heard boots on the boardwalk behind her. She turned and found Sheriff Calhoun standing in the street, his hand resting on his gun belt. 2 deputies flanked him. "Miss Everly," he said, "I need to ask you some questions." Her heart kicked, but she kept her voice steady. "About what?" "About where you got the information in your latest edition." She met his gaze. "I do not reveal my sources, Sheriff. You know that. This is not about journalism. This is about stolen property and aiding a fugitive. I have not aided anyone. I printed the truth based on documents I received anonymously. If the documents are false, prove it. If they are real, maybe you should be investigating the railroad instead of me." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You are playing a dangerous game. I am doing my job. Now, if you will excuse me, I have papers to deliver." She walked past him, her spine straight, her hands steady on the bundle of newspapers. She could feel his eyes on her back, but he did not stop her. She distributed the papers to every business on Main Street, left stacks at the general store and the saloon, handed them to anyone who would take one. By midnight, the whole town was reading, and by dawn, the railroad's land agent had fled Blue Springs on the first stage east. But the victory was short-lived. 2 days later, a man rode into town on a lathered horse. He was tall and broad, with a scarred face and a deputy's badge pinned to his coat. Nora watched from the newspaper office window as he met with Sheriff Calhoun in the street. They spoke for several minutes. Then both men turned to look directly at her window. Her blood went cold. She locked the office and slipped out the back, heading for Lost Creek Ranch on foot. She had to warn Hollis. The deputy from another county, someone with a personal grudge or a financial stake, that kind of man would not stop until he found his target. She reached the line shack as the sun was setting, breathless and shaking. Hollis met her at the door. "What happened?" "There is a deputy in town. He looks like he has a personal reason to want you dead. You need to leave now." He pulled her inside and shut the door. "Tell me everything." She described the man, the way he moved, the look in his eyes. Hollis went still. "That is Wade Kirby. He is the land agent's cousin. I broke his nose 2 years ago when I caught him cheating my sister out of her grain payment. He has wanted me dead ever since." "Then you need to run." He shook his head. "Running will not fix this. Kirby will hunt me until one of us is dead. And if I run, he will turn his attention to you. You printed that story. You made yourself a target." Nora felt the trap closing. She had thought printing the truth would protect them both. Instead, she had painted a mark on her own back and handed the railroad a reason to destroy her. She sank onto the chair, her legs suddenly weak. "What do we do?" she said. He crouched in front of her, his hands on the arms of the chair. "We fight. Together. You have the press and the town's attention. I have the skills to make Kirby think twice about coming after either of us. We face this head on." She looked into his eyes and saw no fear, only hard determination. It steadied her. She nodded. All right. Together. He stood and offered his hand. She took it, his grip, strong and warm. They held on a moment longer than necessary, and something shifted between them. The alliance was no longer just strategy. It was trust. Fragile and new, but real. Over the next 3 days, they planned. Nora continued printing updates, each edition pushing harder, naming the railroad officials involved, calling for a town meeting to demand action. Hollis moved carefully through the hills at night, tracking Kirby's movements, making sure the deputy did not get close to the newspaper office. They met each evening at the line shack, sharing information, adjusting their strategy. And slowly, without either of them naming it, the space between them grew warmer. On the 4th night, Hollis brought her a cup of coffee brewed over the fire. She took it gratefully, her fingers numb from the cold walk. They sat by the hearth, shoulders almost touching, and for a few minutes, neither spoke. "Why did you really come to Blue Springs?" he said quietly. She stared into the fire. "Because I needed to disappear." "From what?" She hesitated, then decided he had earned the truth. "My father owned a newspaper in Kansas. When he died, I found out he had debts I could not pay. The creditors were going to seize the press. I could not let that happen. It was all I had left of him, so I took it in the night, and I ran. I told myself I would send money back when I could, but I never did. I just kept running until I got here. So the press was stolen." "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. "That is why you understood when I told you I was guilty of something." "Yes. You have been carrying that for 2 years. Every day." He reached over and took her hand. "You used it for good. You gave this town a voice. That counts for something, does it? Or am I just a thief who got lucky?" He met her eyes. "You are a woman who made a hard choice and did not let it break you. That is not luck. That is strength." The words hit harder than she expected. Tears pricked her eyes, and she blinked them back. He squeezed her hand once, then let go. The moment passed, but its warmth lingered. The next day, the town meeting convened in the church. Nearly every homesteader in the valley attended, along with half the merchants and a dozen ranch hands. Nora stood at the front, her hands steady on the podium, and presented the evidence. She read from the documents, explained the fraud, and called for the town to petition the territorial governor for an emergency investigation. The response was overwhelming. Voices rose in anger, in agreement, in determination. By the end of the meeting, 50 signatures were on the petition, and a delegation was chosen to ride to the Capitol. But as the crowd dispersed, Sheriff Calhoun pulled her aside. His face was grim. "Wade Kirby is not going to let this go," he said quietly. "He is convinced Hollis Cutter is hiding on Lost Creek Ranch. He is planning to ride out there tomorrow with a posse. If Cutter is smart, he will be gone by morning." Nora felt ice slide down her spine. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you are a good woman, and I do not want to see you caught in the crossfire. Whatever you are doing, stop. Walk away. Let this play out without you." She met his gaze. "I cannot do that." "Then God help you." She left the church and ran for the ranch, her skirts tangled around her legs, her breath tearing in her throat. She reached the line shack just as the moon rose. Hollis was waiting, already packing his gear. "I know," he said before she could speak. I saw them scouting the area this afternoon. I will be gone by dawn. No. She grabbed his arm. If you run, they will hunt you forever. We need to end this now. How? She took a breath. We turn the tables. We bring the fight to them. She outlined her plan. It was risky, maybe reckless, but it was the only move that gave them both a chance. Hollis listened, his expression unreadable, then slowly nodded. It could work, he said. But if it goes wrong, we both hang. Then we do not let it go wrong. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Nora rode back to town before dawn and went straight to the newspaper office. She wrote one more edition. This one, a full confession. She admitted taking the documents from Hollis Cutter. She explained why he had stolen them in the first place, and why she had chosen to print the story. She laid out the entire case, named every guilty party, and called on the territorial governor to intervene. She printed 200 copies and left them stacked on her desk with a note for her assistant to distribute them at noon. Then she went to the sheriff's office and turned herself in. Sheriff Calhoun stared at her. "What are you doing?" She met his gaze. "I am making this right. You want someone to arrest? Arrest me. I am the one who printed the story. Hollis Cutter gave me the documents, yes, but I made the choice to use them. If there is a crime here, I am as guilty as he is." The sheriff rubbed his face. "Miss Everly, this is not going to help anyone. It will if you listen. Wade Kirby wants blood. He does not care about justice. He cares about revenge. If you arrest me, you take away his excuse to kill Hollis Cutter. You force this into a courtroom where the evidence will speak for itself. The territorial governor is already aware of the case. The petition went out yesterday. If Kirby kills anyone now, he is a murderer, and everyone will know it." Calhoun stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "You are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both." He locked the cuffs around her wrists, gently, and led her to a cell in the back. The iron door clanged shut, and she sat on the narrow cot, her heart hammering. She had just bet everything on the hope that the law would work faster than revenge. 2 hours later, Wade Kirby stormed into the sheriff's office. Nora heard his voice from the back, loud and furious. "Where is Cutter?" Calhoun's voice was calm. "Not here." "Then where?" "I do not know. But I have the woman who helped him. She confessed this morning." Silence. Then Kirby's boots on the floor, coming closer. He appeared at the cell door, his scarred face twisted with rage. His eyes locked on Nora, and she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "Where is he?" Kirby said. She kept her voice steady. "Gone. You are lying. Believe what you want." He slammed his hand against the bars. "You think this changes anything? You think locking yourself up will save him? I will find him. And when I do, I will put a bullet in him, and no one will stop me." Nora stood and walked to the bars. "Then, you will hang for murder. Because the whole territory is watching now. You kill an unarmed man, and you become the criminal. Is your pride worth that?" His face went dark red. But before he could answer, the front door of the sheriff's office opened, and voices filled the room. Nora heard footsteps, many of them, and then a new voice, calm and authoritative. "Sheriff Calhoun, I am Marshal Trent from the Territorial Office. I am here to take custody of the prisoner and oversee this investigation." Nora closed her eyes, relief flooding through her. The governor had acted. The petition had worked. She heard Kirby arguing, heard Calhoun's quiet responses, and then the marshal appeared at her cell. He was an older man with gray hair and steady eyes. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Miss Everly," he said, "I have read your confession, and I have read your newspaper editions. You have caused quite a stir." She met his gaze. "I printed the truth, so it seems. The documents you provided have been verified. The county clerk and the railroad land agent are both under arrest. The foreclosures have been suspended pending a full investigation. You and Mr. Cutter will need to answer for the theft, but given the circumstances, I expect the charges will be reduced or dismissed." She felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. You still broke the law. But I will make sure you get a fair hearing." He escorted her out of the cell. In the front office, Kirby stood with his arms crossed, his face like stone. The marshal turned to him. "Deputy Kirby, you are relieved of duty pending an inquiry into your conduct. If I hear that you have approached Miss Everly or Mr. Cutter outside of a courtroom, I will have you arrested for intimidation. Do you understand?" Kirby's jaw worked, but he nodded once. Then he turned and walked out. Nora watched him go, her shoulders sagging with relief. The marshal released her with instructions to stay in town. She walked back to the newspaper office in a daze. The streets were full of people reading her final edition, talking in knots, their faces angry and hopeful. Several townspeople stopped her to shake her hand, to thank her for fighting. She smiled and nodded and kept walking, her mind on only one thing. She had to find Hollis. She went to the line shack that night, but it was empty. The fire was cold and his gear was gone. Her heart sank. She searched the area, calling his name softly, but there was no answer. He had kept his word. He had disappeared. She returned to town and threw herself into the aftermath. She wrote follow-up stories, covered the hearings, interviewed the families whose land had been saved. The territorial investigation moved quickly. The county clerk confessed. The railroad paid fines and withdrew its foreclosure claims. Justice, slow and imperfect but real, was being done. And through it all, Nora felt the hollow ache of Hollis Cutter's absence. 3 weeks later, the town held a social at the church to celebrate the end of the foreclosure crisis. Nora attended because people expected it, but her heart was not in the dancing or the laughter. She stood at the edge of the room, a cup of punch in her hand, watching couples spin across the floor. She was about to leave when a hand touched her elbow. She turned, and her breath stopped. Hollis stood beside her, clean-shaven and dressed in a pressed shirt and jacket she had never seen him wear. He looked different, younger, but his eyes were the same steady gray. "You are here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled. "I told you I would face this with you. I just needed to stay out of sight until the marshal sorted things out. He cleared me this morning." Conditional pardon, pending testimony at the final hearing. She wanted to throw her arms around him, but the room was too full of watching eyes. Instead, she smiled, her heart soaring. "I am glad." He offered his hand. "Dance with me." She set down her punch and took his hand. He led her onto the floor and pulled her into the pattern of the waltz. They moved together easily, his hand firm at her waist, her fingers resting on his shoulder. The room blurred around them, and for a few perfect minutes it was just the two of them. No danger, no secrets, no fear. When the music ended, he did not let her go immediately. He looked down at her, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. She held her breath. "I am staying in Blue Springs. My sister and her family are here. The freight company offered me my job back. And there is a woman here I do not want to leave." Her heart kicked. "Hollis." He cupped her face with one hand. "You took a risk on me when no one else would. You fought beside me. You trusted me. I do not have much to offer, but I can offer you honesty and loyalty and a future built on the truth. If you will have me." Tears spilled over, and she nodded, unable to speak. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sure, and the room erupted in cheers. Nora laughed against his mouth, her hands fisted in his jacket, her heart full to bursting. They left the social together, walking through the cold night air hand in hand. The stars overhead were bright and sharp, and the town was quiet around them. Nora felt the weight of the last 2 years lifting, the fear and the hiding and the lies falling away. She had built a life on a stolen press and a desperate hope, but she had also built something real. She had built a voice, a fight, and now a partnership that felt like coming home. Over the next month, they testified at the final hearing. The judge ruled in their favor, dismissing the theft charges in light of the public good the documents had served. The railroad was fined heavily and barred from further land acquisitions in the territory. The families kept their homesteads. Blue Springs rebuilt its trust in the law, slowly but surely. And Nora and Hollis rebuilt their lives together. But the peace was not complete. 4 weeks after the hearing, trouble arrived in a form neither of them expected. A man rode into town on a cold afternoon, his horse lathered and his face grim. He wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and when he dismounted in front of the newspaper office, Nora recognized him from an old photograph her father had kept. It was Samuel Hewitt, the Kansas creditor, who had come looking for his stolen press. Nora saw him through the window, and her blood turned to ice. She had always known this moment might come. She had told herself she would face it when it did. But now, with everything she had built hanging in the balance, the fear was sharper than she remembered. Hollis was at her side in an instant. He had been setting type at the back of the office. He moved to the window and looked out, his jaw tight. "Who is that?" he said. "The man I stole from," she said quietly. "He found me." Hollis turned to her. "What do you want to do?" She met his eyes. "The truth. I am done hiding." She walked to the door and opened it. Hewitt was already on the boardwalk, his expression hard. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment they just stared at each other. "Miss Everly," he said. "Or should I say Miss Brennan?" Her father's name. She had not heard it in 2 years. She lifted her chin. "Mr. Hewitt." "I have been expecting you." "Have you? Then you know why I am here." "Yes." She stepped aside. "Come in." He followed her into the office. Hollis stood near the press, his arms crossed, his gaze locked on Hewitt. The creditor looked around, taking in the neat rows of type, the stacks of old editions, the worn but well-maintained press. His expression shifted, surprise flickering across his face. This is the Brennan Press, Hewitt said slowly. Yes. You have been using it. Yes. To run a newspaper. To fight for people who could not fight for themselves. To do what my father would have wanted. Hewitt turned to her. Your father owed me $3,000. That press was collateral. You stole it. I know. And I am sorry. I was desperate, and I made a choice I am not proud of. But I will not apologize for what I did with it after. I used it for good. I built something here. Hewitt studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. I came here ready to take the press and see you prosecuted. But I can see you have been using it the way your father intended. He would be proud of you. Even if he would also be angry. Nora blinked. What are you saying? I am saying I want my money, not my revenge. You owe me $3,000, plus interest. If you can pay it, the press is yours free and clear. If you cannot, I will take it back to Kansas and you can start over. She felt the floor tilt under her. $3,000. She did not have a fraction of that. She opened her mouth to say so, but Hollis stepped forward. How much time will you give her to pay? He said. Hewitt looked at him. Who are you? Someone who believes in what she is doing. How much time? Hewitt considered. 6 months. With interest, the total will be $3,500. If she can pay that by the end of 6 months, the debt is settled. Hollis nodded. She will pay it. Nora turned to him, her heart in her throat. Hollis, I cannot. Yes, you can. We can. He looked at Hewitt. Do we have a deal? Hewitt extended his hand. We do. They shook, and Hewitt left. Nora stood in the middle of the office, shaking. Hollis crossed to her and took her shoulders. How? She said. How can we possibly raise that much? We will figure it out. I have savings. Your paper is turning a profit. We can ask the town for help. They owe you their homes. Some of them will step up. It is too much. It is not too much. It is worth it. You are worth it. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Why are you doing this? Because you are mine now. And I do not let go of what is mine. She kissed him hard, pouring everything she felt into it. He held her close, his hand steady on her back, and for a moment, the impossible debt did not matter. They had each other. They had a plan. They would find a way. Over the next 6 months, they worked harder than either of them had ever worked. Nora expanded the newspaper, adding subscriptions from neighboring towns, printing advertising circulars for local businesses, taking on printing contracts for legal documents. Hollis took extra freight runs, worked double shifts, and saved every spare penny. And the town, grateful for what Nora had done, rallied. Families contributed what they could. The general store owner donated a percentage of his profits for 3 months. The church held a fundraising social. Slowly, painfully, the fund grew. But 2 weeks before the deadline, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the barn behind the freight office. Hollis was working late, finishing a manifest, when he smelled smoke. He ran outside and saw flames climbing the barn walls. The building was full of goods, waiting for shipment, including a load of grain belonging to his sister and 3 other families. If it burned, they would lose everything. Hollis did not hesitate. He ran into the barn, choking on smoke, and began dragging sacks of grain toward the door. The heat was brutal, the smoke blinding. He could hear the roof beams cracking above him. He pulled 2 sacks out, then 3, then ran back inside for more. Nora was at home when someone pounded on her door. She opened it to find a boy from the freight office, his face streaked with soot. "Fire at the barn," he gasped. "Mr. Cutter is inside." Her heart stopped. She ran. She reached the freight yard and saw the barn fully engulfed, flames shooting into the night sky. A crowd had gathered, shouting, hauling water. But no one was going inside. Nora pushed through the crowd, screaming his name. A figure stumbled out of the smoke, dragging another sack of grain. It was Hollis, his face black with soot, his shirt burned through in places. He dropped the sack and turned to go back inside, but Nora threw herself at him, grabbing his arm. "No," she screamed. "You will die." He tried to pull free. "There is more inside. I do not care. You are not going back in." He looked at her, and something in his face broke. He stopped fighting and pulled her into his arms. She held him as the roof collapsed behind them, sending sparks shooting into the sky. The barn was lost, but he was alive. The next morning, the damage was clear. Half the grain shipment was destroyed. The barn was a smoking ruin. Hollis's sister wept when she saw what was left. 3 families had lost months of income, and the money they had been saving for Nora's debt, a significant portion of it, had gone up in smoke with the barn. Nora sat in the ashes, her head in her hands. They were 2 weeks from the deadline and $500 short. There was no way to make it up in time. She would lose the press. She would lose everything. Hollis sat beside her, his hands bandaged, his face bruised. "I am sorry." She looked at him. "You saved 4 families from ruin. Do not apologize. But now, we cannot pay Hewitt. Then, we will find another way." He shook his head. "There is no other way. We are out of time." She stood, her jaw set. "I am not giving up. I am going to Hewitt, and I am going to ask for more time. He will not give it. Then, I will convince him." She rode out that afternoon, alone, and found Samuel Hewitt at the boarding house where he was staying until the deadline. He listened to her story, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he sighed. "Miss Brennan, I have been more than fair. I gave you 6 months. I cannot extend again." Nora leaned forward. "I am not asking for charity. I am asking for a partnership. You are a businessman. I am offering you a stake in the Blue Springs Gazette. 10% of profits for 2 years in exchange for forgiving the remaining debt. You will make your money back, and you will have a share in a paper that is only going to grow." Hewitt studied her. "Why would I want a stake in a frontier newspaper?" "Because this territory is growing. Towns are springing up everywhere. The railroad is expanding despite the setbacks. In 5 years, Blue Springs will be twice the size it is now, and the Gazette will be the voice of the region. You invest now. You profit later." He leaned back, considering. "You are bold. I will give you that. I learned it from my father." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. 10% for 2 years. The debt is forgiven. We have a deal." Relief flooded through her so fast she almost wept. She stood and shook his hand. "Thank you." Do not thank me. Just make sure that paper keeps growing. I want my investment to pay off." She rode back to town with the signed agreement in her satchel and her heart singing. She found Hollis at the newspaper office, trying to set type with his bandaged hands. She walked in and set the agreement on the desk in front of him. He read it, his eyes widening. "You did it. We did it." She pulled him to his feet. "We saved it. The press is ours." He kissed her, deep and sure, and she felt the last knot of fear unravel. They had fought for this. They had bled for it. And they had won. 2 weeks later, they were married in the Blue Springs church. The whole town attended. Nora wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers. Hollis stood at the altar in a dark suit, his hands still bandaged, but his smile genuine. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, close enough to the newspaper office for Nora to walk to work, and close enough to the freight yard for Hollis to do the same. They worked side by side, building the paper, raising their voices for justice, and carving out a life that felt earned and true. 6 months after the wedding, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Hollis one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He stared at her, then pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "We are going to have a family," he said. "Yes, a real family." She heard the wonder in his voice, the disbelief that something this good could be real. She pulled back and cupped his face. "We already have a real family. We have each other. The baby is just the beginning." He kissed her forehead. "I love you. I love you too." The baby arrived in the spring, a girl with auburn hair and gray eyes. They named her Clara, after Nora's mother. Hollis held her with the same careful intensity he brought to everything, and Nora watched him and felt her heart overflow. They had built this, against all odds, against fear and secrets and the weight of their own mistakes. They had built something worth keeping. The newspaper continued to grow. Nora hired an assistant, then a second printer. The Blue Springs Gazette became the most widely read paper in the territory. She wrote about land rights, water disputes, territorial politics, and the lives of ordinary people trying to make a future in hard country. And Hollis was beside her through all of it, reading her drafts, offering perspective, making sure she never had to face a fight alone. 2 years after Clara was born, a letter arrived from the territorial governor. Nora opened it at the breakfast table, Clara babbling in her high chair, Hollis pouring coffee. She read the letter twice, then looked up, her eyes wide. "What is it?" Hollis said. "The governor wants to appoint me to the Territorial Press Council. They are forming a committee to draft guidelines for ethical journalism and freedom of the press. He says my work in the foreclosure case made me a natural choice." Hollis set down the coffee pot and grinned. "Of course, you are a natural choice. You are the best journalist in the territory." She laughed. "I am the only journalist willing to pick fights with the railroad." "That too." She set the letter aside and looked at him, her heart full. "I could not have done any of this without you." "Yes, you could have. You were already fighting before I showed up. I just made sure you did not have to fight alone." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I am glad you showed up, even if you did bleed all over my cellar." He laughed. "Best decision I ever made." They sat together in the morning light, their daughter playing between them. the future stretching out bright and wide. Nora thought about the girl she had been 2 years ago, desperate and alone, carrying a stolen press and a heart full of fear. She thought about the night in the storm cellar, the moment she had chosen to trust a dangerous stranger. And she thought about everything that had come after: the risk, the fight, the fire, the love. She had made mistakes. She had broken laws and bent rules and carried secrets that should have destroyed her. But she had also stood up when it mattered. She had fought for people who could not fight for themselves. And she had found, in the midst of all that chaos, a partnership that felt like home. The years passed, each one adding layers to the life they built together. Clara grew into a curious, determined child who loved to watch her mother set type and her father handle freight manifests. A second child arrived, a boy they named Thomas, with Hollis's dark hair and Nora's green eyes. The newspaper expanded again, adding coverage of 3 neighboring towns. Hollis was promoted to freight manager, overseeing operations for the entire region. They bought a bigger house, added a second story, planted a garden. They became the kind of people who hosted town meetings and 4th of July picnics, who offered advice to young couples just starting out, who were sought after for their wisdom and their steadiness. But the best moments were still the quiet ones. Evenings on the porch after the children were asleep, sitting side by side and watching the stars. Mornings in the kitchen, passing coffee and discussing the day's work. Nights when they lay in bed and talked about the future, about the children's education, about the next editorial, about whether they should buy the old Miller place and expand the ranch side of things. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was silent and the world felt far away, Nora would turn to Hollis and he would pull her close, and they would remember. The storm, the cellar, the choice that started everything, the danger and the trust, and the slow, hard-won falling into love. "I would do it all again," Nora said one night, her head on his shoulder. "Even the fire," Hollis said. "Even the fire. Because it led here. To you. To this." He kissed her hair. "I never thought I would have this. A family. A home. Someone who sees all of me and stays anyway. I am not going anywhere. Good. Because I am not letting go." She smiled in the dark. "You said that once before. And I meant it then too." They held each other. The years behind them and the years ahead of them, both precious and earned. They had started as strangers forced into an uneasy alliance. 2 people carrying secrets and sins they thought would bury them. But they had chosen each other, over and over, in every moment that mattered. And that choice had built something stronger than fear, deeper than shame, truer than any lie they had ever told. The Blue Springs Gazette continued to thrive. Clara learned to set type at age 8 and wrote her first editorial at 12. Thomas followed his father into freight work, but kept a journal that Nora secretly hoped would one day turn into a book. The town grew, just as Nora had predicted, and the Gazette grew with it. Samuel Hewitt's 10% stake paid off handsomely, and he sent Nora a letter every year at Christmas, thanking her for making him richer than he deserved to be. Wade Kirby left the territory and was never heard from again. The railroad rebuilt its reputation slowly, under new management that played by the rules. The families whose land Nora and Hollis had saved became pillars of the community, their children growing up with the knowledge that ordinary people could stand against powerful forces and win. And Nora and Hollis grew old together, their love deepening with every shared challenge, every solved problem. Every morning, they woke up beside each other and chose to stay. They were not perfect. They argued about editorials and freight schedules, and how much to tell the children about the messy early years. They made mistakes, missed cues, carried old wounds that sometimes flared up unexpected. But they faced it all together, and that made the difference. One evening, 20 years after the night in the storm cellar, Nora and Hollis stood on the porch of their home and watched the sun set over Blue Springs. The town had electric lights now, and a railroad depot that ran 3 trains a day, and a school that Clara was teaching at. The world was changing, faster every year. But some things stayed the same. The land, the sky, the feeling of a hand in yours and a heart that beat in time with your own. Hollis wrapped his arm around Nora's shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" he said. "Taking me in that night." She leaned into him. "Not for a single second. Even though it almost cost you everything, it gave me everything." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you. I love you too. Always." They stood together as the sky burned gold and pink and orange, as the stars began to appear one by one, as the night settled soft and deep over the life they had built. They had started in a storm, with blood and desperation and fear. But they had built something beautiful from that broken beginning. They had built a home, a family, a love that had weathered every trial and come out stronger. And as the last light faded, and the first stars shone bright, Nora thought about the girl she had been, and the woman she had become. She thought about the choices she had made, the risks she had taken, the sins she had carried, and the grace she had found. She thought about the man beside her, the partner who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. And she thought about the future, still unfolding, still full of promise. They had made it. Against all odds, through fire and fear and the weight of their own mistakes, they had made it. Together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the mistakes or the secrets or the battles they had fought. Just the two of them, standing together, watching the stars come out. Just the love they had built, brick by brick, choice by choice, until it was strong enough to hold everything they had ever hoped for. They had found each other in a storm, and they had built a life worth living in the calm that followed.